Perfect. So I appreciate the time, everybody. My name is Eric Huddleston. I'm the CEO of TrendKite. This is Steve Vaughn, the principal architect at TrendKite. And TrendKite is a big data SaaS platform that helps brands and their agencies to quantify the impact that their public relations efforts and their mentions in the news have on their brands. We're based in beautiful downtown Austin, Texas. We're relatively early stage, but we have a fairly significant marquee customer base with folks like Hershey's, the Memphis Grizzlies, Pinterest, and most of the unicorn startups. We're still relatively small, but growing at a pretty crazy rate. And the fundamental product that we built was a big data processing pipeline that essentially crawls all of the media sources in the world, pulls in all of the data, then executes natural language processing, named entity extraction, to build ontologies around the semantics of those articles that we can then do derivative analytics on to help our customers to understand, for example, what was the impact of the Walt Mossberg panning of the iPad Pro this week on brand awareness, on mind share versus, say, the Microsoft Surface, on things like brand reputation. But then we'll also do things like analyze the impact that PR has on digital, like traffic or SEO, by analyzing keyword distribution, page rank of your backlinks, and then quantifying that in terms of its overall performance impact. And then we'll also actually take that down to analyzing impact on business results like revenue. The scale of the problem is pretty formidable. So at any given time, we're analyzing anywhere from 1 to 2 billion long-form news articles, and I use the word news very loosely, from over 2 million dynamically changing sources or publishers. And then you have to do that in a fairly spectacular number of languages. Anywhere from 19 to 20 primary languages, up to 56 material languages, all the way up to a significantly higher number of that, closer to 90 for sort of the long tail of the news business. And it actually has the media landscape is a pretty dramatically changing environment. So I think we all understand that print's dead. So, very little newspapers get thrown in your yard in the morning. You don't walk down to the newsstand and, pick up a copy of Newsweek anymore, or U.S. News and World Report, to find out in-depth insight into current events. And that's radically lowered the barrier to the creation of media outlets. So we've gone from a relatively small number of concentrated outlets to a radical proliferation of news sources that gets highly targeted in their audience, but then they also vary in topical influence. So you get these micro blogs that cover the latest cutting edge cat fashion. And that's actually a legitimate category of over 1,000 news sources on cat fashion on the internet today. And then the life cycle of those, as you might imagine, cat fashion blogs don't last long. So the variability and volatility of those sources is pretty extreme. And discounting that volume of unstructured data becomes super challenging to extract the ontologies that matter, semantics. You can think things like authors and publications on a very basic level, but then also things like the companies that are mentioned, the people that are mentioned, and why that's material. So I think probably everybody understands what an ontology is, but really this is a hierarchical model of entities and then the properties associated with those entities with some defined relationship between them. So think about classic examples like countries, and maybe we have continents, and then we have countries under those continents. And then we may have relationships between them, like which ones have touching borders. And those build what's essentially the contextual relevance or the semantics of the words that you see in any given article. And in our world, that creates some really powerful use cases and capabilities that enable a solution like Trinkhite to exist. So you can imagine if you're a PR professional who is at the absolute other end of the technical spectrum from everybody in this room, and they want to do a search on Target, the department store. And so if you were to just search Target in all the news in the universe, you'll get some articles about Target, the department store, but you'll also get the Olympic results for archery, and you'll get the latest airstrikes in Afghanistan. And it's those ontologies that and the extraction of those and the semantics that they're embodied in that make that sort of semantic search possible and easy in those environments. It also allows you to find the articles that are relevant to Target, the department store, when Target, the word, is never mentioned. So if you see an article that's all about the red card, which is the Target credit card, you'll know that that's about Target because of the clustering and the distance between those words. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Steve to talk a little bit about the challenges that you hit inside of that domain as you start to build out those semantic representations.
Right. Thanks, Eric. So, as I mentioned, I'm Stephen Vaughn. I'm the principal architect at Trinkhite, and today I'm going to walk you through our use case, sort of the challenges that we faced, how we solved those, and where we're going with the technology that fell out of that. So, before we can know how an article or some piece of data kind of fits into our ontological model, we need to extract some metadata from it in various forms. Author, publication, in this particular example, the data publication. So we've all read online news, and what's almost trivial for the human eye to pick out, like the data publication, can be tricky to teach a machine how to do. Just recognizing date strings from unstructured text is problematic, particularly across multiple languages. If that date string is broken across multiple tags, all sorts of hosts of problems. And most of the news articles that you see today, whether they're visible or not, contain dozens and dozens of dates. So how do you pick which one is kind of the one true correct thing to pick? Well, so our first step of the problem used open web standards like Facebook's Open Graph, Dublin Core, Schema.org, some others, right? And these standards provide markup that identifies semantics around particular pieces of data, like authors and, hey, lucky us, the data publication. Cool. So we pull the page down, we rip out the meta tags, and we look for the big flashing neon sign that says, I am the published date. So that was easy enough, right? And that worked really well for top-tier publications like New York Times, Wall Street Journal, sort of the AAA headliners, right? So we're done, right? Because everyone follows standards. Well, as it turns out, that's not necessarily the case. And while there's a correlation between readership and standards adherence, and that works really well for the top tier. Kind of for the middle and the long tail, it's just terrible. Those sites are all over the map. So,
cat fashion blogs don't follow
yes, exactly.
If you're wondering.
Yes. Nearly none of the cat-related sites do. So the next thing we did was we built a Bayesian decision tree. And what it does is it kind of rolls over all of the text and all the tags from the HTML. It recognizes all of the dates that it can find, and then it ranks them by the probability that that is the one true published date that we want. And that probability is influenced by several factors. If the date's inside of an obvious advertisement, that's a massive penalty. If it's inside of an anchor tag, it's a weaker penalty, and generally they don't link anywhere. And if its parent tag happens to have an attribute that says, I am the freaking publish date, it's a huge bonus, right? We do the same thing with kind of text position, where publish dates are hardly ever in the middle of the article text, but certainly if they're on the edges or if they're proximal to something that's more interesting in the page, like the author or the title or the byline or something, then that's a bonus as well, right? That sort of thing. Y'all get it. So what are the problems with that? So it's worked out well so far, 70-80% accuracy, just picking random pages off the internet. But as we look down how we scale this out, we started to realize that what we were building progressively and incrementally was sort of a unified field theory, right? One tree to rule them all, if you will, right? And this treezilla was eventually going to come and eat our city, right? We kept adding these rules and adding these branches to this successively more complicated thing. And rare, but we did find mutually exclusive cases where often we'd have to pick which site we loved more, or come up with goofy site-specific rules. Where if site X, then do this one specific thing that nobody would ever do. So how do we avoid that unfortunate future, right? How do we, where do we take this technology where it's more generally applicable and scales better? Well, the underlying theory here is that nobody writes HTML anymore. There's no one typing, raw HTML into Vi, Emacs, Notepad anymore. They're all created by these automated systems that take raw input in and they stamp out the actual resulting web pages, at least in the news industry. And this mechanized generation provides or generates very similar structural pages, right? The presentation can be wildly different, right, for a variety of levels. But structurally, they're almost all clones, which is super ripe ground for clustering and classification. In fact, we can then break this, what we were approaching was a sort of universal decision tree, and we can break them into very class-specific decision trees, these specialized decision trees, so that when we see a new article, we run it through our classifier and figure out that, aha, this article is of structure, Blue Monkey WordPress. Great. Let's go get the decision tree that knows all about those structures of pages and can pull out, the dates and the authors and the topics and all of the other pieces of metadata that we really wanted to tease out that's specific to that class. And in doing so, we reap massive benefits to speed and accuracy, and we avoid the unintended future of trying to create one huge decision tree. So that's the end of me.
So I appreciate the time, and I know we're running a little behind, but if there are questions, we'd be happy to answer them. And my one gratuitous plug is, like half the other folks that we've heard about, we're also hiring.
Yeah, we should just have people announce if they're not. Just generally assume. No. Hey, questions? Anybody? No? You sure? You sure? All right. Okay, well then let's thank our speakers.